started. So we'll get started. So if everybody can get situated. So welcome. This is the Alaska Education Network. My name is Carrie Gray. I am the ECHO project coordinator. And to my left,
I am Raquel Schroeder, the ECHO assistant.
And to my right,
Mark Stock. I'm ECHO grant program manager and ASD deputy superintendent.
So welcome. We really appreciate that you could make it here this morning. So all of you, we have some veterans in the crowd. They know what to do, but what we're going to do right now is we're going to get to know each other and know who's in the room. So how we do that is we rename ourselves. So you're going to click on that participant button. A list of participants are going to show up on your screen. You're going to be at the top, hover over that, and then click the blue button that says rename. We would love for you to put your first, last name, and then where you're from. Is it a school? Is it a district? Is it an organization? And then I'm going to ask you to do one more thing. You're going to go to that chat box. It's the little kind of thinking cap chat box. You're going to go there and put all that information, including your email address, in that chat box. Why do we do this? Like I mentioned, it's to understand who's in the room. It also helps us with attendance, and then for reaching out later if people have questions for anyone in the group. So if you could do that, rename yourself and then go to that chat box and put your name and information in the chat box. So just letting everybody know, this is recorded. We do record all sessions and we have them publicly posted on our website at www.echoeducationak.com. If you could just give us 2 to 3 days. We usually don't take 3 days to get them. We do some editing before we post those. So you can refer back to the recording as well as introduce it to someone else that might couldn't make it here today and would love to see the recording. The other thing just to mention is this ECHO sessions are not meant to be a sit and get. They're really meant to be interactive with some conversation. So how we do that is we would love for you to see your faces if you have that webcam. It really helps us to see who's in the room. Also use that chat box. You can ask questions, make comments, have an opinion. You can talk to each other privately or you can talk to the group. And then also we are a pretty small group, so if you do have a question, feel free to raise your hand in the Zoom toolbar, or you can just wave your hand like this and we will make sure we give you the microphone. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Stock and he will give us and start our presentation.
Well, good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can see that. Everybody see it okay? Give me a thumbs up. All right, so what we're going to talk about today is having difficult conversations, and this happens to be one of the core issues with being a leader. And I'm going to have to stop share and try something else because it did not advance the slide. So let's try it this way. There we go. So as far as my information, I've been a former elementary teacher principal. I've been a superintendent for 15 years and came to Alaska to fish and hunt and ended up back in the schools again. So been a college professor in ed leadership for 5 years, working in the superintendent preparation programs, and I'm an outdoor guy, which makes Alaska perfect for me. So what we're going to do today is everything I'm going to share with you is built off of 2 resources. And if you haven't read these books, they're worth the read. The one on the left, Having Hard Conversations by Jennifer Abrams, is almost a workbook. If you are an instructional coach or if you work on coaching other adults, I find this particular resource to be very helpful. The Crucial Conversations book is more of a business book, if you will. It's more of geared for maybe corporate life, but it's also very useful. So everything I share today, I want to give credit to these 2 resources. So before we get started, here's what I'm going to ask you to do. We're going to try an experiment here. We haven't used the breakout rooms in ECHO very much, but some of you may or may not know that when you're new to the cyber world, getting your audience to engage is a challenge. And a lot of times you will sit and you will listen to other people or, heaven forbid, multitask. There will be several of you in the room who have your screens open and you are doing emails right now. And one of the funny things you may or may not know, Zoom has a new feature, and so we know who's doing that and who isn't. So on our version, we're looking at the participant list, and it actually puts little clocks next to it that shows the timer is running for who's minimized their screen and is doing other work. It actually lets the people on here know what the audience is doing. So one of the things we're going to do is we're going to try to incorporate in some of our echo periods a little bit more interaction. So here's what we're going to do. Every single one of you in this room has at some point in time procrastinated a difficult conversation you wished you'd had earlier. Could be with a peer, could be a colleague. One of the most challenging ones I ever had was about 10 years ago, was having a difficult conversation with my boss at one point, or a board member. That was a difficult conversation. But what we know is that all of us have something in our home life, our church life, our social life, our work life, where there's someone that you feel like you probably need to talk with but have not done that yet. Here's what I'm asking of you. If you will think of that scenario right now without doing anything that would personally identify that individual, I'm asking you to think of someone in your circle that you probably need to have a hard conversation with, but you've been avoiding it. Now, what we're going to do is go into breakout rooms right now, and it's going to randomly put you into groups. And we're going to use, since there's 18 participants, let's put them into 5 groups. So we'll put you in 5 different groups. And here's what happens. Your screen is going to prompt you and ask you to join. If you don't join, you're going to stay right here in the main group. So you have to click on the word join. So we're going to create the rooms in just a second. And when we get there, I want you to go around the table real quick in your cyber, unmute your mic and just simply say, you know, I'm a principal. I have a conversation I need to have with an employee, but don't provide enough information that anybody here would be able to identify that individual. And all you need to do is to share the topic. I have an employee I work with that doesn't come to team meetings on time. I have an employee who spends all her time on a cell phone and sits at her desk in the classroom and does emails when kids she should be circulating. You know, just something that would say what the scenario is and what that conversation is. Could be at home or whatever. So are we ready? We're going to create the rooms and I want you to share. I will pop in and out of those rooms as a host, and we'll look and see how it's going. We're only going to do this for about 2 or 3 minutes, so go. Okay, so I think we're all back to the main room, and it might have cut off some of you. It looks like you guys are really going at it in some of the rooms. So here's the thing. We're going to come back to this technique here towards the end of the presentation. So there's going to be a second interaction piece where I'm going to ask you to reflect on this individual. So everything that I'm going to share in this presentation, I want you to use the screen of the individual that you have in your head. With that person in mind, we're going to go through the following presentation. So in the book, Crucial Conversations, our authors say that after 20 years of research, this idea of this skill to carefully and diplomatically address challenging conversations is the most effective skill of leadership. And so you can do a lot of other things and think it has a lot to do with other things, but in reality, highly effective leaders have somehow mastered this over time, where they're able to hold people accountable in very kind and dignified ways, or maybe even, as Sean Prince would say, radically candor. You know, the idea that they're able to be candid with people in a way that gives permission for that, and to do it in dignified ways. So what is a crucial conversation? Anytime there's a conversation between two people when the stakes are high and there's different opinions about what to do and there's some strong emotions in the room, the authors would call that a crucial conversation. So if you think about this family member that you're thinking of, for example, the fact that those relationships are very important to us heighten the emotions that come with having that conversation. So that's how they define a conversation. So hopefully you've already thought of one, whether it was personal, family, social, work, or church. So I'm going to ask for a show of hands for all of you that are looking at me right now. So if it was a conversation that is in your personal life, raise your hand. Okay. If it was in your, well, maybe it overlaps. Maybe if it was a personal family member, like in a close family circle, raise your hand. How about socially, like someone in your social circle? One. Work. How many of you chose a work conversation? That since we're on a work environment. I mean, how about like a church or some other organization socially? One. Okay. So I want you to think of that and keep this in mind as we roll through here. The first thing our authors say is that you need to be careful to refuse what he calls the fool's choice. And he says that oftentimes we have this subconscious feeling that if I have this conversation with someone that's important to me, I risk losing the relationship. And he says the irony is it's the opposite. 8 out of 10 times when you choose to have a hard conversation with someone you care about or that you work closely with, if you do it well, the truth is it enhances the relationship, not detracts. But he says that we consider this a fool's choice. We think it's one or the other, when in fact we can have both. So we're not going to take this stress test right now, but if you will download this presentation later, or at this time Raquel's typing it into the chat box so you have a copy of it. Don't go to this right now, but I think there's about 30 questions they ask you, and it will tell you what your style is under stress. And most of you probably inherently already know this, but these are the styles that this little test will give you. It will say, are you a silencer or a violencer? In other words, do you fight or flight? So knowing your personalities, I look around the room, I'm looking at everyone's eyes here on screen. If you are probably a silencer, raise your hand. If you're one of those people that tend to get your dander up and fight back and defend yourself and argue or defend, raise your hand. A few, okay? It's interesting because in education, there actually is a cultural norm of trending more towards the silence, where we mask our feelings, we kind of hide them or avoid them, or we withdraw and just pull ourselves back. Now, Sean, being an ex-Marine, he might be more controlled to attacking and more labeling if he's not watching how he responds. But we all have a tendency. And the irony is that oftentimes your tendency depends on who you're talking to. There are people who go back and forth between those two styles based on who it is they're talking with. So that's my Cliff Notes version from Crucial Conversations. The rest of what I'm going to share with you now comes from Jennifer Abrams' book, Having Hard Conversations. And why do we do this? She says educators are prone as a cultural norm to avoid conflict. It happens to be one of our preferred styles. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to ask you to get a piece of note paper ready, get a little notepad out, lay it next to your table. And here's your task. I'm going to go through 18 reasons in a rapid fire session, spending just a few seconds on each one. You are going to write down if that tendency is one that fits the personal situation you have in your head. So whatever this person is you're avoiding, have that situation in your mind, and then I'm going to go through 18 reasons you probably haven't had that conversation yet. And if it fits, write it down. Don't overthink it because a lot of these overlap. Several of them sound almost alike when you get going. So number one, if you've been avoiding having that because of a desire to please, you feel like you want this person to like you, or you don't want to look, mean by having the conversation. If that fit, you just put down a desire to please. If that person is scary, or you're worried about them getting angry with you or stomping out of the room, if you've been in administration very long, you've had a variety of these. Most people have learned a coping mechanism, and if they're aggressive and scary, they've learned that most people back down when they're aggressive or scary. So it's a coping mechanism they've developed. I've had people throw their keys at me. I've had people stomp out of a room. I've had people slam the door and walk out. So if safety is a reason you've been avoiding them, write that down. Number 3, if you've been avoiding them because you just don't want to make waves, or is it just too much work? Number 4, fear of the unknown. This one's kind of fascinating because they've done some studies. Educators, of all the values they might hold at the top of their list, their number 1 value is stability. If you want to know why education is hard to reform, if you want to know why they don't take change well, it's because the cultural norm of educators tends to be stability. They'll put up with anything: stress, stomach ailments, insomnia, headaches. They'll put up with anything rather than fear of the unknown. They would rather deal with what they know, and they'll often put up with a lot of stress and just let that scenario go without addressing it. Number 5, no sense of urgency. If you've been avoiding this person because you're just going to wait until they do it one more time. I'm going to wait until they're late one more time. I'm going to wait till my son refuses to clean his room and comes out with a whole laundry basket full of dirty dishes that he's been hiding under his bed. If I've been waiting for him to do it one more time, or the 3rd time's a charm, if that's it, write down no sense of urgency. Number 6, some of you are in new positions. Some of you are looking at expanded roles. And if you've been avoiding it because you just don't believe the culture allows you to meet things head on, that might be one. Some of you are in buildings where the culture is not to have that kind of confrontation or whatever. And I would say, not to make it about Anchorage, but for many of us here, the last several years, we're learning how to have those kind of conversations, which, in the past that may have not, or may not, depending on who you ask, been a cultural fit in your department. Are you waiting for the perfect moment? Those of you with family members know that sometimes you just keep waiting for that moment when everything's right, and then I'm going to have the conversation. Are any of you perfectionists? And you just refuse to do it until you have the perfect words, till you have everything scripted in your head, just ideal, and then you'll do it. Well, that moment never comes, right? Number 9, do you not trust your gut? Not to make it too much about family, but my wife has often said over the years that she learned not to trust her initial reactions to things. And even though they often are right, she'll second guess herself. She will not trust her gut instincts. So it keeps her from bringing something up when she feels like maybe she'd be better off if she had, but she just doesn't trust. Maybe I'm not seeing it right. Maybe I didn't interpret that right. So if that's you, you can write that one down. This is a big one for you instructional coaches. I'm looking around. Some of you have done some coaching. Some of you don't feel like you have the bully pulpit. You lack authority. Who am I to bring this up? I'm not going to bring it up. I'm not in charge. That's somebody else's problem. So if you've been avoiding it because of a lack of a feeling of authority, this is very true in curriculum departments. I'm looking across there. I was a curriculum director for a while, and I can tell you that they often feel responsible for a lot, but feel they have no authority. And so that's where number 10 comes in. This one's similar to the gut instinct one. Do you distrust your own judgment? Do you say, well, I don't know, who am I to tell them how to do their job? This one's a big one. Oftentimes, employees who need to be visited with about something are having personal things in their lives, personal problems. So we have this fear of kicking someone when they're down. probably the most dramatic personnel issue I ever dealt with in my career came when I went to fire a tenured teacher, and the community came completely uncorked because her husband had a serious life-threatening illness and she needed the insurance, and the fear of kicking her when she was down brought out. I had 450 people show up to board meeting and testify for hours why the district should not do this, all because of fear of kicking a person who is having a challenging personal life. This is a new one for instructional coaches as well, or new supervisors. If you've stepped up from one position into a more of a supervisory, you'll find that that shift in role expectations freezes you. Sometimes you will not have a conversation because you're still trying to figure it out. When I used to role play this with my master's classes on principal preparation programs, teachers would break out in big red splotches on their neck when they were role playing. And then one of them actually said to me in class, I had never really thought about having to have these kind of conversations with people. I never thought about that because my principal never had one with me. I just didn't know they did a lot of this. And so sometimes a shift in role expectations is a problem. This one's similar. Just wasn't in my job description. This is true for colleagues who are uncomfortable talking to someone that's on a parallel peer track with them, that they're not really their boss or their employee. They just say, well, it's not me. It's not in my job description. That's somebody else's problem. We're almost there. Hang on. So 15, if you are in a small village or in a small district, sometimes everyone knows each other. It's even true in Anchorage. I think everybody in Anchorage is only a couple of degrees separation from somebody. And so sometimes you let something slide you shouldn't because it's too close to home. Everyone knows everyone, and therefore I'm afraid to have this conversation. This is true. I can remember as a superintendent being uncomfortable having to talk to a board member about some personnel issue because they were related to the person that we were talking about. 16. This one is sometimes a big one. Sometimes you're asked to do something in an organization that conflicts with your own beliefs or values. Sometimes something comes down from the board, comes down from a superintendent or cabinet, comes down from a legislature, where ideologically is just not in alignment with what you think. And so you avoid the conversation when in fact you're probably supposed to have it, but you just let it slide. 2 more. This one's easy. I'm just too tired. Fatigue is real. This time of year, I see Kelly laughing. I don't know if it's about that, but at this time of year, everybody's tired. Every administrator I know is completely fatigued. And so I don't even have energy. I'm just going to pretend I didn't see that. When you're walking down the hallway and you hear something in the room and you go, I need to talk to that person. Oh, I'm just too tired to take it on. And last one, occasionally you let something slide just because it's a nice person and they mean well, and I'm just not going to address it. They're a good person. Their heart's in it. They're okay. I hate to confront her on this because she's such a nice person. All right. Those are 18 reasons why we tend to avoid them. So hang on to those, because when we come back to breakout, you're going to be put in a new breakout group and you're going to share which of those reasons resonated with you with regard to the person that you're currently thinking of, okay? So here's some other things to think about. Number 1, when you don't address these issues, our authors say that you're going to pay a price. There is a personal toll for not having the conversation. One of them is just guilt. You're going to feel fraudulent. You're going to go home and lay there at bed and thinking, I really need to tackle that. I don't want to do it. And you're going to feel fraudulent because you are not in the world as you really are. You have this thing and it's in dissonance with what you're avoiding, and you will pay a toll personally because you keep avoiding it. The second one is that you actually give control or power to the other person because it looks like you condone that behavior. And so in an organization, when you let someone you're afraid to talk to for some reason behave in a way that's either perceived as outside of values or is outside those values, you are condoning it, and it looks to other people like it's okay with you. Third one is kind of similar to the first one, which is you feel a little bit like a hypocrite because you have these principles in your head, but you're not really living up to them. And the last one I think is huge, is that who pays the price? Oftentimes it's kids or adults or clients. Basically, you're allowing an organization to experience negative consequences because you are failing to interact at some level of authenticity. So those are the personal tolls it takes if you keep kicking the can down the road. So when should you not confront? There are times when it's appropriate to let it slide. And so here are some things to think about before you decide whether to keep avoiding it or not. One of them is timing issues. Sometimes problems take care of themselves, and you just simply have to let the person go through this and kind of work through it. I knew a principal one time who would jump on every little nitpicky thing his staff did and created an environment where people were paranoid, because this principal he was perfectly willing to confront, but he'd do it over everything. He would go in there and say, "You were late today, what happened?" Well, unless that's the fourth day in a row or a pattern, maybe they just got in traffic. So you don't have to confront everything. So think about timing. Think about the right time for the other person. If the person had a car wreck on the way in and they're late and they're traumatized, it's not the right time to have that conversation. And the other thing is how do you prioritize this conversation over all the other conversations you've been avoiding? And towards the end, I'll give you a tip on how to prioritize. So another thing to think about is, what are the stakes? What's the best and worst that can happen? So if I let this slide, maybe the worst is not that bad, so don't worry about it. Is there a ripple effect? Do the negatives outweigh? And here's a big one. Who might I need to talk to before I talk to this person? Sometimes you got to get a little more information. Third thing to think about before you decide to confront is, do I have a plan for this? And what are the most promising hoped for results? There are occasionally examples where someone is completely incapable of changing. And you have a decision about whether the hoped for results are promising enough to warrant even having the conversation. Another thing to think about, does this person have an opportunity to recognize this on their own? Sometimes just letting them sit with it for a while sometimes will take care of itself. Another thing is, are there other alternatives besides confronting this person with less risk? Occasionally there's another person on staff who can have that conversation better than you. And are they willing to do it? What's the worst that could happen? And then the big thing is, how likely is that to happen? Sometimes you confront things when you don't model the behavior yourself. If you've been late 3 days in a row to work, it's not the time to go down and talk to that teacher about being late, right? Because what are they going to do? They're going to throw it back in your face. They're going to come back on you and say, well, what are you talking about? You've been late. So you have to be careful that you model the behavior that you actually are asking others to demonstrate. Feasibility is a big one to think about. Does this person actually have the capability of reforming or changing this? And if I bring up this concern, is there time to deal with it? As we move towards the end of the year, you'll find principals letting a few things slide here and there because other big things trump their day. So with that in mind, before we go through some wrap up here and put you back in groups, I want to share with you this outcome map. We have a copy of this in a Word document, and we can upload that into the chat bar so you can print it off if you want to take it. But here's a recommendation I would have. You print this little list and keep it in your desk drawer. And so as you think about wanting to have a conversation with someone, here are the steps that you walk through. Make sure you know the problem that's presenting itself, what it is you want out of it, what behavior specifically is supposed to change, and so on. So we'll walk through that real quick. So step one, how to have a difficult conversation. Step one is to explain the presenting problem to the individual. So when you bring them in, you say something similar to, hey, thanks for coming in to see me. The reason I wanted to visit with you today is I noticed you've not been attending your team's scheduled collaborative meetings. And I want to let you know that that's been noticed. And I just wanted to make sure that I had a chance to visit with you. What you just did is explain the presenting problem to them. Now, what did I not do? I didn't start out talking about how's your pets, how's your dog, how's everything going on in your home life. I didn't start out in a way that would be too inappropriate on the soft side, right? I just thanked them for coming in and I got to my point. You send mixed messages when you bring somebody in for this and you turn around and try to make it all about their family or something. So stick to your presenting problem. The second thing you say to them is you explain the outcome you're after very clearly. In case there is some confusion, I want to make sure that you know that it is my expectation as the principal that you attend your team's scheduled collaborative meetings. I mean, that is an expectation. If you need to get further, you can explain where that authority comes from. You can explain whether it's, just an agreement. Is it a handbook issue? Is it an ethics issue? Is it just your opinion? If you need to give it more weight, but don't ever feel embarrassed to just simply say it's my expectation. If you're the boss and you're the leader, you have that right to say my expectation is. So just say that. Step 3, explain the specific behavior you're seeking. So I expect you to attend the plan meetings and to be on time and be prepared. I also want you to let other people know if you cannot be there. It's my expectation that you contribute to the workload in an equitable manner. So you're actually explaining a specific behavior. Number 1, attend. Number 2, be on time. Number 3, be prepared. Number 4, let people know if you're not going to be there. And 5, you are equitable in your workload. So those are 5 specific behaviors you're asking for. Step 4, explain what knowledge, skills, or attitudes they need to meet that. So you say to them things like, I want you to be aware of the impact this has on other people when you're late or absent. Do you recognize the professional role you have with colleagues? You have a lot to offer people. So not only can you benefit from their support, but you have skills and knowledge to contribute that I think they can benefit. And so those are the kinds of dispositions that I'm looking for here because I believe we can all benefit. Step 5, describe the strategies that will promote their growth. So you say something like, just to make sure we're clear, here's the job description. Here's the code of ethics from the staff that says you have a need to be there to attend. Is there anything you might need from me to make sure that these meetings are relevant and helpful to you? So now you're saying, I own part of this. How can I help? What do you want from anything I can do to help you that would make that easier for you to contribute? And then describe any resources. Sometimes there's upcoming training. Sometimes there's materials or books that people have found helpful. Sometimes you offer them other resources. Sometimes you team them up with another colleague, but you offer any resources. And then you finish. You conclude by asking them questions to seek their willingness. In other words, you're trying to get buy-in here. So you conclude the conversation, you say, how do you see this issue? Is this something you're willing to work on? I always like that question because it's a bit of a trap in a way. They say, no, I'm not willing to work on it. Okay. Where do we go from there? No, I'm not willing to do that. I see. Well, I guess that's not negotiable to me because we've got these expectations. And so, I need you to do that. Is this something you can do? And so you conclude by restating your expectations in the very end. It's my expectations that you will attend the collaborative meetings and be a positive contributor. Thank you for working on this. You're thanking them ahead of time. And this is that presuming positive intent piece. Okay, thank you. I know you can do this, and thanks for helping work on this. It's just like the student when you're dealing with a behavior issue and you say, thank you for sitting down, and you turn out of their face and they have complete confidence that they're going to obey, right? And you walk away crossing your fingers. I hope they do what I said, right? But the point is you show no fear. You were confident. And you do that with staff too. You say, thank you for working this. I'm confident that you will support the team and we can depend on you. And so thanks for coming in. And here's where you let them know there's accountability. I will touch base again in a few weeks and I will see how it's going. Now they know you're not going to forget. And here's the tip. Go to your calendar, put it in your calendar, because if you don't, you'll forget. And I've had this happen myself where I tell an adult, I will check back in 2 weeks and see how it's going. And then I forget to put it in my calendar and it goes by. So put it in your calendar, schedule it, and make sure you do it. So that's the outcome map that you follow. So there's a couple other tips in closing before you go to breakouts. Number one, when you have this conversation with them, set the tone and purpose and make sure you scale your attitude to the seriousness of the conversation. For example, if you're having a call to conference and you're terminating an employee with HR, when you come in, you tone the seriousness of it to that. You're probably sitting at a table with a barrier between them. You're not going to sit together side by side as if you're having this friendly fireside chat, right? Our superintendent's office has some couches and chairs, and we'll do preliminary interviews there. We don't have a call to conference on discipline sitting around the fireside chat, right? So you scale the level of intensity to it. And believe it or not, there are people who are a little tone deaf about this and don't always gauge that. Another tip, get to the point and name it very professionally and avoid trigger words. You don't say lazy, chaotic, crazy. You use professional language that's non-judgmental. When you give your examples, you start with the most current examples first and you don't give too many. I have seen some disciplinary things where somebody starts and they go back 2 years and they list all these things that they're upset about. And basically they've been collecting them, right? That does not do well with the employee because number one, you should have had that conversation 2 years ago then if you're saving these things up, right? Number two is that they'll find one thing on the list that was wrong and they're going to perseverate on that and then criticize everything about that you just shared. So only list current examples at the top. Make sure you explain the impact on everyone, school, students, parents, and so on. State your desire to resolve this issue and open the discussion. And at some point in time, you're asking them to share how they see this issue. Prepare the logistics for the conversation. No cryptic voice messages or emails. All of you have had this from a boss. Maybe you've done it. I once got a cryptic voicemail on Friday night, or a cryptic email on a Friday night from my boss that said, I need to see you Monday morning. Okay, no context, no topic. I stewed about it all weekend. I walked in on Monday morning, said, you wanted to see me this morning? And the person said, yeah, I don't even remember what it was about. If I ever think of it, I'll let you know. It was just some tip or idea I had on something. I don't remember. I said, well, next time give me a little more feedback, because I kind of worried about it all weekend, thinking I'd done something really wrong or something. So no.
Or looking for a new job.
Yeah, right.
Spending the weekend looking for a new job.
Yeah, go update that resume. Find a private place and time. Think about the timing. And the last tip here is about body language. A lot of you don't always do this, but just there's a thing they call the credible voice of authority. And that is when you're talking with a credible voice of authority, your voice goes down at the end of a sentence like that. If it's the approachable voice, you go up at the end of a sentence like that. And depending on the tone of the seriousness of this conversation you're having, you decide whether it's going to be approachable or whether it's going to be the professional voice of credibility. So you decide on what the topic is. But the same thing goes for your hands. Hands up is an open invitation and approachable. Hands down is the credible voice of authority. So you fold your hands on the table and you make sure you don't send mixed messages. Because what happens when you're across the table to people, if you're not careful, you're mixing your tone and your verbal and your words, and it gets confusing. And the last bit of advice before we talk is, you have so many battles to fight, how do you even know where to start? Well, here's my advice. Choose the one that's, if we're talking about employment and we're talking about schools and students in particular, choose the one battle that has the most negative consequences for students. Make a list of those and pick the one at the top that's the easiest to solve. Okay, the easiest. When I first became a principal, my first advice from the exiting principal was, there's so many battles here to fight. Be careful which ones you pick. You know, there's just too many things to try to resolve at once. So how do I know where to start? Well, which ones are most negative for your clients and which one's the easiest to fix first? Start with that one.
So we're gonna, Sean, do you want to say what you put in the chat box there?
Yes, I was just trying to quickly go in there and spell check distinct, but also is there a distinct difference between when we're having a difficult conversation and the preparation we have during that conversation and when we're actually going in to have a finalizing conversation? Like, because as we're talking about the different steps all the way through 7, I'm reflecting on a conversation that I've had with this person that kind of covers all those things. But now I'm at the point where the difficult conversation is I go in and I'm going to say, I'm going to let you go from this leadership position. So is there differences? Because I'm not trying to lay out further expectations. This is more like we're just done.
I agree. So because of timing, I took a lot of it out of this. When I do consulting work on this issue, I actually go through 4 levels. And you mentioned level 4. Termination is like the level 4. But there's 4 levels of this conversation that can occur. The first level is what I call sort of investigation. It's the exploratory meeting. You get a troubling phone call late at night. A parent is accusing a teacher of something really bad. And you stewed about it all night. When you come in the morning, that is level 1. That is investigation. That is just exploratory. You're going to bring the person in, and you might do a little chit chat. Hey, come on in. How are you today? Hope everything's going well at home. Hey, listen, I need to let you know about a troubling phone call I got last night. Now, you notice how my voice went up, my hands go up. I'm still in level 1. I'm investigating. So it's okay not to drop a hammer. I'm coming in and I'm asking you what happened. Tell me about what happened. That's level 1. So it's the voice of approachability and investigation. So that's level 1. Level 2 is where you've already done that and you find there's a reason to be worried. You've done a little homework, you've made a few calls, you think you kind of know most of what's going on. So you're bringing them in, and I call this sort of the, if it's not immoral, unethical, or hurting children, it's probably like the verbal reprimand piece, right? So level 2 is kind of like, hey, listen, this is what I believe to have happened. I'm going to give you a chance to explain it, and then I'm going to tell you what we're going to do. And then that's like the verbal reprimand piece. Like, hey, my expectation is this won't happen again. So that's where the hands are down, credible voice. So level 3 is what I call like a written reprimand or some form of mild discipline, where you've already investigated, you've already talked to this person at least once, and now you're on this level 3 of something has to stop here. I'm putting it in your file. I'm letting you know. I'm putting you on notice. And of course, Sean, you've done all those steps, and you're talking about level 4. So level 4, there's a tip I don't have in here because of time, but a level 4, one tip I used to use is I wrote the minutes up in past tense before the meeting and had it in my drawer. And yet I waited till the meeting. What it does is it forced me to envision the meeting. So I would write up before the meeting takes place. It says Dr. Stock brought in so-and-so to the meeting and asked to visit. Dr. Stock indicated that he wanted to visit with them about this topic. And he mentioned that he's talked to him on this date, this date, this date. Dr. Stock reiterated that they've been through this. Dr. Stock said da-da-da-da-da. Dr. Stock informed them that blah, blah, blah. And then I leave a little paste. The employee said, and then I leave a blank there and I can fill it in when the meeting is over. Because you don't know what they're going to do. They might throw their keys at you. They might stomp out and slam the door. They might call your bluff and say things like, well, I should probably just resign. At which point, I always keep a blank piece of paper in the desk drawer, and you pull it out and put it on the table and say, you know, you're probably right. And you call their bluff. When someone threatens to leave you and you don't take that, then they have the power. So what you do is you call their bluff if you're in level 4. You know, unless it's a situation where they've molested children or something and you're not going to let them resign, you must terminate because of you want to make sure that's on their record, right? There's some things you will not accept a resignation over. And sometimes you don't let them resign, you fire them because you want that on their record. So did that answer your question, Sean? So there's 4 levels to that, and you were in level 4 there. Yep, I like it. Thumbs up, yeah.
So just to summarize, so you're bringing them in, you've already had that conversation, you've set your mindset to make sure that you are just kind of follow those steps, you're not forgetting anything, but you're just stating it, you're allowing them, depending on the topic, to resign, or you're going to just state. It's not about opening the door for further conversation. Correct. You've had that before, is that correct? That's right. So you're stating, you're being credible, firm, yep, and you're stating it, and then you're allowing them to react the way they would react. Okay.
There's one cautionary tale about writing that up ahead of time in past tense. And that is the way digital resources work. Your computer records the dates and times and all those things are done. So you would never type something like that up in level 1, 2, or 3 because it looks like you've predetermined everything you're going to do. You only do that if you've done everything and it's termination time, because when they go to discovery in a lawsuit, all that digital information about when that document was prepped will be discoverable to someone. And you don't want it to look like you've already decided what you're going to do before you even investigated something. So you don't put things like that in past tense in writing unless you're already done.
Does anybody else have a question for Mark or each other, just really quickly?
Glenn, I see your hand is raised. Did you want to say something?
Well, Mark and Sean were pretty articulate. I have a meeting this afternoon with the principal, and we did, my pre-meeting with the principal was to prepare them for this call to conference we're having this afternoon with the staff member. And I use what I call the portfolio method. So I have the principal script out in just some bulleted points, the key topics, And so they, like Mark was suggesting, or was saying, they've already had the meeting in their mind, they've written it out. Now they've taken some key elements they want to make sure that they have. So when they have their portfolio in front of them, they can have that on the one side and they're able to take notes. And the key thing behind that, though, I would share with the principal was, you know, you don't really want necessarily the staff member to see your notes there, but those are just for you to make sure that you're hitting all the topics, and then you're using the notepad to write down things that may have come up, then that would then be memorialized in your follow-up memo. So that's all I was to share.
That's excellent, Glenn. And I think it goes without saying that, you know, since we focus quite a bit of this on the employee side of it, it also goes without saying that in your notes, remember that everything you say, do, and write is discoverable in a court of law. So you don't write things on the margins that say this person's a wackadoo. You don't write things on there like, you know, cray, you don't, oh, never mind. I was going to say cray, but Glenn, that's an inside joke you would get. But anyway, you don't say things that would be derogatory along the sides, because those things become discoverable, and all your doodles, they become part of the record. So.
And I also assume that level 4, this is really would be the most important place not to have that, hey, how's it going? How you know, that kind of conversational, that you don't want to give mixed messages at this time. You're in there for a task. You want to get that task done. You don't want to, because I know I've seen that. I've experienced that where you have all these niceties and you're like confused, and then you have this serious conversation. I think it deters exactly what you're trying to do, plus it confuses the person.
Right. And another thing too is you don't react to their emotions. So I always keep a box of Kleenex in my office, and I've had, you know, people, when people start doing the tears come on and they break down, and they've also learned that tip works. Whether they're angry or whether they're crying, they've learned that that's a coping mechanism, and that you'll back off. You know, I don't say, oh, it's okay, honey, you know, we'll work through this. You know, no, you just stick to your script and you stay dignified and professional, but you don't react to the tears. You don't react to the anger. You just stick to your professional script. So with that in mind, we're going to put you in breakout rooms now. And what I want you to do is I want you to go back to the individual you were thinking of. Now, what's funny is, Ray, wave your hand at me if you've changed your mind over who you're going to talk about. Did you decide to switch people? I've had a few people who've changed their minds after going through all this, but pick the person that you started with. You have a list of notes there. We're going to put you in groups, and without anything that would identify them, we're going to randomly put you in groups, and you may end up in a new group this time. And what I want you to do is share the person that you would like to have a difficult conversation with in the next month or so. And what were those reasons that you were avoiding them? And last of all, one tip that you learned today that you can add to your repertoire of having conversations. So who you want to talk to, what were the reasons you were avoiding them, and one tip. So 3 things to share. And so Raquel will put you in groups, and we'll give you about 5 minutes or so or more, maybe even longer to share. Remember to click join when you see your screen pop up. Remember to click on the word join. There, try that again. Okay, so thanks for sharing there. I'm sure we cut some of you off, but a couple things we wanted to do is experiment with the breakout rooms today to see if we had a higher level of interaction among people and sort of engagement. I want to close by at least touching base on Amy's comment. Amy had put a comment in the chat bar that whole thing about tears is that it is very true that tears are not always, you know, manipulative in nature. That's true. I think what I was saying is that there are folks who have conditioned themselves to the tears over the years. All I'm trying to say is that irregardless, don't think of it as manipulative, but just don't let it manipulate you. You know, presume that they're very sincere, but don't allow it to push you off of the conversation that you're wanting to have. Stay in that professional, dignified role. I mean, I've reached over and handed him a Kleenex and carried on without acknowledging anything other than kindness, and just carry on.
In our group, we had a conversation about the opposite of tears is humor. Sometimes someone will put in a joke. When it's a serious situation, that's their way to cope, probably diffuse the tension that's building. But I've seen that too, is humor is sometimes used probably inappropriately.
Yeah. So in closing, I just want to full loop where we started from. Having these conversations is probably the primary skill of effective leaders. They've learned to be able to have these. They have them regularly. They have them in very kind and dignified ways. And they've learned how to respect people's professionalism. And this is, the good news is our authors say that this is learned. This behavior of having these conversations is a learned skill. Some of you may found it easier to learn than others, but in fact, every single person who's in leadership has learned to do this effectively. So, and that's the presentation.
All right, well, thank you, Dr. Stock. So typically we have a problem of practice. Of course, we do not have the time. We've kind of paralleled that with our breakout rooms. So as we do with every session, we end with announcements. And one of the biggest announcements that we try to do, incorporate in every session, is to get you to fill out that evaluation link. We talk about data all the time. We are very dedicated in evaluating the project, the sessions, the networks. So please, if you could take a few seconds and fill out that survey, it's really fast. It helps us to tweak it for you and meet your needs. So if you could take a second to do that. I just want to announce for next week at this same time, same channel, we're going to have Dr. Lisa Skiles-Parody from ACSA to do a little quick legislative update. So we welcome you back. And then the second portion of that session is our evaluator, Data Driven Enterprises, is going to be here with us, and we're going to talk about next steps. So next steps about the project, maybe some needs as you educators out there in the state. We want to make sure our next implementation is meeting those needs. So we welcome you back for the legislative update and then also the little quick roundtable.
And don't forget that we're seeing more traction from the downloads of the presentations than we sometimes even do the actual live ones. So remember, if you want to use any parts of what you heard today with administrators or whatever, you can use the PowerPoint. The narration was recorded. So feel free to use those materials with your own administrators or in other areas if you find any part of it useful.
Yeah. The other thing I just want to mention is if you have time in your busy schedules today, I would love to welcome you back at 3:30. We are in our Leadership and Equity Network. We are having Jerry Briscoe from CERC do a really great presentation on essential elements of a culturally proficient leader. So if by chance you could attend that, or if there's someone around you that you think could benefit from that conversation, make sure 3:30, and if you check our website, you can get the link for that session. So with that being said, we're just going to open it up to the group. Does anybody out there have any announcements, good things that they would like to announce to each other? All righty. Well, we really appreciate your time. We thank Dr. Stock for his presentation. Like we mentioned, it will be on our website for you to pull down or share with people that you think could get value from it. So thank you. Have a great day. Take care, and hopefully we'll see you next Tuesday for sure. Bye, everyone.